No worries.
3, 2. Sunday Live, another show. I think this is the 130th live show, if you can believe it. But today, the guest couldn't be any more special, to especially myself even. The great music producer, broadcaster, journalist, teacher, the one and only Stephen Mallinder. Stephen, welcome. I got to cancel this secondary spin-off here. It's an honor to have you on here today, I have to say. You're joining us today from Brighton?
Yeah. Sunday evening in Brighton, which is, for people who don't know, it's kind of referred to as London by the sea. So it's sweet. It's a very kind of bohemian, mad little city. It's not very large, and it is only sort of an hour on the train or by car from London, but it's far enough away to sort of feel like a different planet. So yeah, I've lived here for about 14 years now, which really scares me, because it's been so many years since we've seen each other. Wow, time flies, eh?
It's just ridiculous how fast time is going. We were just chatting a second ago, and I think it was like 35 years since we've last seen each other. And then the first time I met you was in 1985, so it's considerably even longer. But the weather, is the weather pattern much different between Sheffield and Brighton?
Yeah, we're actually in. Well, it's the middle of winter, and you can tell by the lighting that I've got in my lounge room. It's very nocturnal, very wintry. The sun is long gone, but it's not too cold here. We live in a little bit kind of eco bubble that's protected, and it's not that it's cold, but it's not too bad. Yeah, Sheffield, I know, because I've been speaking to my mates, and yeah, it's snow up there, I think, at the moment. So yeah, it's colder up there, but yeah, not too different.
So I'm gathering that you guys are in a big lockdown as well over there. Is it a stay-at-home situation?
Yeah, we've been. I mean, this is the third kind of full lockdown, which I'm not quite sure what lockdowns mean elsewhere. I think they vary from country to country, but here it's literally, you can go and buy food shopping, and really that's about it, really. It's just food and sort of, pharmacy stuff, and really one exercise a day, and you're not supposed to meet. I think the official thing is you can meet one other person who's not from your household. So it's pretty extreme, and I think that's the problem for, particularly in Europe. It's a winter lockdown. Everyone, the first time around when it happened in April sort of May time, there was this sort of newness and a vibe, and it was oddly kind of quite. I think it's quite exciting in the sense that people quite happy to reluctant, to sort of give up their life, as long as they can control things, feel okay. People felt there was like, this is a change that's enforced on us, and there was a newness to it, and there was a vibe of things being very different, if you know what I mean. It was like the silence was incredible, in terms of just sort of all of a sudden you could hear natural ambience, and the lighting, and just sort of pollution dropped, and no litter on the streets, and so there was just this weird kind of vibe to it. But because it was warm and getting warmer, and we had this amazing heat wave, so we had this beautiful kind of, everybody didn't mind sort of at least not being able to socialize while there was sunshine. But man, it's fucking different when it's cold and wintry and very dark. So I think and also I think everyone's looking for the exit, really, with things at the moment. So it is quite tough on a lot of people. I do know that.
So it was really strange. I think the very last thing we did before we went into lockdown here was on March the 12th. Been pretty much locked down ever since. We went and saw Robbie Krieger from the Doors play a live acoustic set at this little bar down the street. And I swore he didn't end with the end, but I thought like it was horribly appropriate in a weird type of way. And LA went into a lockdown after that. It was so quiet. You could literally sit in the center of a street or hear the pin drop almost. And there wasn't really that many people infected. But now LA County's turned into the most infected county in the most infected city in the most infected country on the earth. Yesterday we crossed a milestone of 1 million infected just in our county, and 250 people dying a day. It's on the average of 8 people a minute, or something crazy like that. And everybody's back out again. So it's kind of crazy that we all went into lockdown when it wasn't really happening, but now we're out of lockdown. But with everything going on with the political spectrum as well, it seems like the need for Dadaism is back.
Yeah, I think there's a need for there's always a need for, if not satire. I don't think that's overly simplistic to call things satire, but there is a need for expression. There's a need for statement. There's a need for a kind of at least almost like a primal sort of scream of "we are here," if you know what I mean. And also because of the political situation, and we've moved into this strange sort of, theatre of spectacle that's going on. I think there's also a massive need for art and artists and people with that kind of sentiment to be heard, because we seem to be kind of drowned out by the bullshit that's coming out, and particularly through the media and everything, the way things are at the moment. I mean, it's such a complex and sort of toxic kind of brew that's there, but I think there's a need for a response, and I think, and also, I don't think there's ever been a greater need for creativity and creative thinking, and for people to look to those things as well, because I think we need to sort of address what the human soul is all about right now.
Yeah, a little bit of absurdity and needs to be applied in art as well.
Yeah.
Do I call you Doctor or Professor Mallinder now?
Just call me Mal. Yeah, I've actually been talking about about whether I'll become a professor. I'm not sure. To be quite honest, and it's not something that I particularly saw. I became a doctor by accident more than anything else. I didn't go, oh, I want to be an academic. I was actually writing and doing radio stuff as well as doing the labels and doing music. And I got asked to write a thesis because I was writing a book, and somebody said, well, I think you can get money if you do a thesis, because you can then turn this into a book. And that's how I ended up doing kind of academic stuff in terms of music. But it's become part of what I do. But I'm very much a reluctant academic in that sense. I think I still see myself as, I do lots of things, but I still see myself as just, I do music. I enjoy that, but there's a whole world that's kind of that's attached to that, and I don't mind that, and it's quite nice. And I work in the arts, and so I get to meet amazing people, and Brighton itself is a wonderful kind of hodgepodge of complete mad people, really crazy people. In actual fact, I will mention it because I've been talking about it earlier today with someone, and there's a book out at the moment by a writer called John Higgs, who's from Brighton, and he's written some amazing books. He wrote the KLF book about how to burn £1 million. He wrote the Timothy Leary biography, I've Got America Surrounded, I think it is. And then he's written this book about The Future Starts Here, but it's all based around people in Brighton. And God, there's some really, there are some crazy people down here, so it is quite nice. And I work within the arts in this, so it's kind of part of that. So I enjoy that. It's nice to meet all these sort of fascinating people, so it is part of it. But yeah, I don't flaunt it, although I think I've got doctor on my driving license because somebody told me, a mate of mine years told me, he goes, Mal, get it on your passport, because if because there's a chance you might get bumped up to first class if you're flying. Okay, that's all right. And he said, but get it on your driving license, because my mate who was a doctor, and he goes, because when you get arrested, he goes, it's amazing when the police ask for your name and you're in the back of the police car. He goes, their attitude completely changes when you say you're a doctor.
Sure.
So I went, okay, I'm going to have it on my driving license, and that's kind of it, really. But I do enjoy all the things that I kind of am involved in. So yeah,
So you'd really be kind of like the doctor of digital music and sound art.
I'm my kids call me. My kids say I'm a doctor of. One of my daughters said I was a doctor of disco, and another one said I was a doctor of drum and bass. So you can choose between one of those. So yeah. I mean, yeah. I did write it in that. It's about rhythm. My PhD is all written, and it's all about rhythm.
Yes, I 350 pages was a lot to create in your thesis, The Journey of the Beat, which addresses the trajectory and transition of popular culture through the modality of rhythm. What you
sounds pretentious, doesn't it?
No, it actually was really cool because, as you said, the endless transformation of the beat, more than the familiarity of melodies or harmony, has provided the auditory narrative of the age of mass consumption of popular music. Yeah. And it's so interesting that, interpretation and perception of music has become such a vital sort of language that we understand later. Say, for instance, the 20th century history is completely locked. You cannot add or change or anything to the communications which were made during that time. So in some ways, a lot of the things, such as you pointed out, Africa Bambaata's Planet Rock is universally acknowledged product of cross-fertilization and cultural crossroads, or of musical tourism, almost of musical inspiration. So later now, you must reach this stage where the things that you started doing as maybe insignificant at the time to each of us as a person, later becomes such a huge thing when you see how many times it's been interpreted by people.
Yeah, I mean, I always think we're all part of a kind of a, we're a chain letter. We're an evolving chain letter, and I'm very thankful that I've kind of, we and Cabaret, myself and Richard and Chris and Cabs, and what we've done has played a significant kind of, at least, I suppose, chapter in that letter that's gone there because of the time and the place in which we live. But yeah, it's all about connection. It's all about joining those dots and seeing those connections between people and ideas, and music is a representation of all that, really. So I'm very humbled that we have some part in that narrative, as exactly you yourself have as well. So it's nice. I think in some ways I feel very fortunate that we, yourself included, made the music that we did at the time we did. That's not to diminish what's going on now, but the complexity of things that are going on at the moment, music is part of that and massively important in a bigger field of art. We worked in we were around in a time when music was so significant, I think. And I think it was at that point when it was starting to change things. The whole punk period, the post-punk period, later going on to a lot of the club cultures, I thought was such a significant time for music, and there was such an impact on how it's affected people. And now, I'm not saying it's not important. Everything, being creative and everything we do is all really important, but it was, it was kind of top of the mountain, I think, at that point, and I don't want to paraphrase somebody, but a friend, Julie Campbell, Lone Lady, referred to it as sometimes we feel like we're rattling around in empty rooms now in terms of the impact that we make, whereas music had such significance. But that was because of the way those things aligned and the fact that people were consuming on that level, the media was working in that way. And music very much, and electronic music was front and center in that world. Now it shares space with so many things, but that's inevitable. We just as we mass produce, everything music is no different. We do mass produce that, and so trying to find your way through these pathways through a lot of music becomes different. This, you know, it's so, you know, the sky is full of music and sound. So, but yeah, I feel lucky that I was able to sort of, you know, make music at a time when we could more easily see the connections, if you see what I mean. It's harder to find it's like a Rorschach kind of test. So it's really hard to work out what's going on. Whereas it was a little bit easier in the sense of seeing how we connected at that time.
I don't know whether to go backwards in time first, or actually maybe I just want to start with saying Dada is a fantastic album, and it hits me in a spot where you've successfully come full circle, I feel. And so it's not being overshadowed by technology or as you say, we've been so confused by the options that we're all given today in the creation of music, that it's really almost more of a greater challenge of how to work with less. Less is more. And I just praise your approach on Dada. It's really hasn't really left off from your sort of approach on Powwow in 1982, and then arguably my favorite 12-inch of probably in my collection. I mean, you know, this is in what, 1981, and it's literally I mean, both sides fantastic. It's probably my favorite. You have to fight me for this record out of my collection.
Oh, thank you.
It's really amazing that the feeling that I get out of your new album is not too much different from that. And yet again, there was what, 37 years in between the time that you made the two albums. Does it feel like you're getting back into a headspace that you'd forgotten about, or is it just that you'd put it aside for a while?
I think, do you know what, Kevin? It was really funny because loads of people going, oh, there was such a big gap between doing solo records, but I've never really thought about things in a solo way, in the sense that I am by nature very collaborative, and I enjoy working with people. I enjoy the things that I do. So it's like I always felt that there was enough in there representing everything I did. But I suppose what I did realize what was happening with Powwow was that I made a record where I did everything, and I'd never done that before, and it hadn't really appealed to me, to be quite honest. I love doing Powwow, but I actually much preferred doing the cabs because I enjoyed working with other people. But then I realized that it was quite nice that I needed to give myself I kind of needed to sort of give myself the time and space to do something just on my own. So I just went back there, and maybe things haven't changed. When I do go into a room and it is just me on my own, then I try, in terms of the writing of this, it was quite nice to just go, well, I do prefer to work from a very small palette. And I did do that. I mean, I did go in to do Dada with a similar kind of mindset. And it was somewhere, I said to Benj when we were mixing it, it was like, I want this to sound somewhere between the Jacksons, or both the Jacksons and Terry Riley. That's what it was. And that's what Powwow was. It was like somewhere between the Jacksons and Terry Riley, because that kind of systems idea and the simplicity and the rhythm was what I was. So yeah, I did. And when we did Dada, the idea was actually to write it all with just mainly just using one or two keyboards, because I'm still inspired by that period when people, what it was like in those early days. People now have so much gear and kind of electronic equipment and analog and modular stuff is so fetishized, but in actual fact, people go, oh, you've had this gear for years, and it was like, no, we didn't. We had drum machines and delays and a couple of keyboards and tapes. The world that people live in now of analog gear is like, we dreamt of that, but we didn't have it. And we worked with minimal gear, and that was what I wanted to do. And I also like the early Detroit and the early Chicago vibe of, those guys, I remember working in Chicago, and with the house guys, and they were like, there was only one 808 in Chicago as far as they knew. They went, oh, the house guys have got one, and then the Latin guys have got the other, and we were like, well, can we borrow one? It was like, we're gonna have to see the Latin dudes to borrow the 808, you know what I mean? And it was that kind of vibe, and so I like that idea of just stripping it down to to simple things and rinsing it out. And I'm not a musician in that sense. I'm very minimal and very primitive, and I stretch myself to make music in some ways, but I just like the gut feel of things. And so in that sense, I don't think anything's changed between how Dada. When I'm pushed to it, I'll make sounds out of very simple things, and that's all I wanted to do, really.
The sounds are fabulous. That's the greatest part of it. I mean, a simple sequence that sounds good, or the way that the bass has that just that meaty, and say analogy texture. But how did the technology differ? Obviously, you're probably working on a computer now, and powwow was probably what, all analog?
Powwow was done on an 8-track, Tascam 8-track, and we had drum machines, and we had I think an SH09 that I used, and a little in fact, I didn't use the sequencer. I used the kind of cEvin thing that came out the back of the drum machine. So it was very simple, and everything else was, I played bass, I played guitar, but I was really into processing. So it was like using the pitch transposers and all those kinds of things. And then when I went into the studio to do Dada, I mean, I'm making it sound like I'm poor me, I've got no equipment, and I do that now. I'm very fortunate. I work with Benj and Mimatune, and even though I went with the idea, we've got Moog Modular, everything, so it's nice. But that, in fact, that was why I wanted to do Dada like that, because it was like, in a world of everything, I want to use very little, and I'm very lucky that and so I was able to say to Benji, I just want to use simple drum machines and things like that. So, because that's a privilege. I am very, very privileged. It's where we do the Wrangler stuff. It's where we do Creep Show. And Benj is a collector. He, and I refer to people who fetishize about that. And I don't mean this in a kind of sarcastic or derogatory way. Benj is absolutely amazing, and his studio is unbelievable. And I'm very lucky to go and do that. But you kind of have to go in with rules almost, because otherwise you just, it's beyond a kid in the toy shop, because there's so much stuff there. And I'm just working on, and I'm kind of about 5 tracks into a new solo record. And nice. Which was great, because with Benj, we kind of go, this time it's minimal, but this time it's like, decided to do everything. I'm trying to do everything on a 90s stereo sampler, because it's like, I want that feel. So I'm using the S750, and literally that's become like the record. It's become the machine that I record on and everything. So I'm doing vocals and doing all the vocals through a stereo sampler. That's the plan to do it. So you just kind of go, we've got everything, but let's just work with this one thing. So I'm working with the stereo sampler from the 90s and trying to base an album around that.
The aesthetics of your mixing is what I always like, how you've always treated your voice, and the variety of signature Mal sort of sounds that you make. I mean, I'm curious more so. I know you talk about effects, but you don't talk about specific effects. Are you attracted to any specific particular effects? Is kind of like the signature go-tos.
Yeah, I mean, to be quite, I mean, there is a kind of hookup between some of the cab stuff, kind of 80s cab stuff, and the more recent Wrangler stuff, in the sense that I like to use pitch transpose. So we used to use an MXR harmonizer with the cabs, and used to do that, and some of the vocals went through that, and obviously delays and all this. But for the last Wrangler album, which I use a lot of pitch transposing, use the Eventide. So nice. And I manipulated my voice with that in a lot of things. Sometimes people go, I think on Stupid, on the White Glue album, and I did Stupid, and people going, what the fuck's that effect on your voice? And I went, it's not, it's me singing in a high, in a falsetto voice, actually. There's not really any effects on it. But then again, there's kind of like there's a default for my voice, which I've used for a number of years. And that's because I use them live, and it's the one thing I do. I use like quite a lot of them live, and I use chaos pads. So it's not expensive, and it's not sort of, it's not too much trickery. But for live, I use pitch transpose, a little kind of Roland vocoder, and but a lot of it I use the chaos pad, because you can do so much with them musically and sonically, and also it's not an instrument; it's just a box that just messes with your mind, really. So that's, there's obviously, there's nuanced stuff, and I used lots of different types of effects for different tracks when we're in the studio. But basically, if somebody said you need to use something on your voice, you can only use one thing. Every time, chaos pad.
Right, good. That's modern day advice. You don't have to go searching in the vintage bins for stuff.
No.
I really have to say, Wrangler, man, it provides to anybody who's looking for the spark. Where's the spark? Well, the spark exists in like LA Spark, White Glue, The Situation, fantastic production. It sounds like you guys are having a lot of fun. And as you say, Benji's got a great collection of instruments. And so the sounds on there are wonderful, like really harken back to, I don't know if some of them kind of like harder, kind of brings up a very sort of, did you ever hear that album by Liaisons Dangereux that Connie Plank made?
Yeah.
All the chord stuff. There's a certain quality to that album that I never heard in another album. But you guys have that. It has that harder has that sound. I don't know if you use chords on that. Your remix of the John Foxx song Shatterproof. I mean, it's nice to see that your collaborative collective is kind of like you were saying, you like to work with other people more than you like to work on your own. So I guess like finding Ben Edwards and Phil Winter was it kind of a bit of a blessing?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say from the off that the most fun I have in the world is working with Benj and Phil. And then when we throw John Grant in for Creepshow, we got another level of it. But yeah, I mean, Phil and I have been friends I've known Phil about as long as I've known you, maybe a few years longer. Phil and I have been friends since about 82, and we've always fucked around and done stuff and DJ'd. He's kind of like, we've always done stuff. And even when I was kind of traveling, living elsewhere, Phil always stayed in touch. So when I came back to England, Phil just went, Mal, you've got to come round and meet my mate Benj, because Phil's in a band called Tongue, who were very successful over here. Benj had the studio, and Benj was doing stuff for John Foxx, and it was great. And it was one of the funniest kind of meetings ever, really, because Phil had said to Benj, we should get Malin to do some vocals on some of this, and he went, Malu, and he went, Mal from Cabaret Voltaire, and Benj went, you don't know him? And Phil goes, yeah, I do. So he went, Benj went, fucking hell, get him up here. So I went up to the studio. This is years and years ago when I first arrived back in England. I was living in Brighton. So I went up to the studio thinking, I'm going to go, say hello, meet him. It's really nice to meet this guy, look at his studio. And I didn't know anything about, thinking about working together. But I've been there 20 minutes, and Benj is a very singular person and works. He just went, go on then, do something. It was literally that. And so we did. And within, I thought I was going up for a cup of tea and maybe a beer at the end of the day, just to say hello. But I think within 3 hours, I think we'd written 3 tracks. Wow. And that was it. And we've been working together ever since. And they're family to me, and I love them to bits. I have to say, we've got to give a shout out to Phil, because I hope he doesn't be annoyed for saying this, but Phil's got COVID at the moment. But so he's okay. He's well. He had his first drink of beer and cigarette yesterday, I think, for about a week. So, and his football team won today. So I believe he's on the mend. But yeah, in this situation, send him a shout out, because it's been pretty tough for him. So it has affected him. But yeah, I'm very close to them, and I think the world of them, and I feel very lucky. As I say, work with lots and lots of people, but they're kind of like my music family, and I do think the world of them. And as I say, then with Creepshow, John Grant as well. So we've got another kind of string to that bow as well, which is wonderful. Yeah.
Are they back in Sheffield?
No, we're all. That's the difficult thing. That's why Benj and I were working on my album, but on my album, but we stopped because we're all in different parts of the world. Benj lives in Cornwall. I live in Brighton. Phil lives in London. John Grant lives in Iceland, because we're actually in the process of doing the next Creepshow album. But I don't think you could possibly be more dispersed in a lockdown world than that.
No,
so, but yeah, no. So we spend a lot of time together, and we gig and we tour, and so we're very close. Yeah.
And you're also working with Stephen Cobby, Hey Ruby, Cobby and Mallinder.
Yeah, Steve and I haven't done anything. We should hook up again and do some stuff. Steve's up in Hull, another part of Yorkshire, but we haven't done anything for a while, Steve and I. I am in touch with him a lot. I'm hoping we can get back and do some mixes again. But yeah, I've been working with Steve again. This Steve is somebody I've known for a very long time. Yeah.
I love the Can cover, Vitamin C.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of that was one of the hardest tracks we did. There's about 20 different versions of it. We should bring out all the versions of it one day. But yeah.
Going all the way back to your original inspiration, was Can on the list as part of, like, say, Eno and the people that maybe inspired you originally before you started making music?
Yeah, I mean, Eno was very significant in it, in that I think for a lot of people who kind of emerged in the punk period, Roxy Music were a big thing. That they appeared like as if they'd come from outer space, and they had a massive impact on people musically in one way, but also just stylistically and aesthetically and everything like that. So Roxy Music were a big thing, but for us specifically, Brian Eno was significant, because we were young working class kids, and we were into kind of soul and funk. We were all into that kind of music. And Eno really, I think, was the first person who we could identify with as a musician in the way, or a non-musician, or offered another element to music as we understood it, that was completely where we were coming from, because we were into art and into Dada and into all those things and all that mad kind of stuff. And Eno kind of encapsulated that idea of somebody who worked in music but wasn't a musician. So, if anything, the Cabs were a band of three. We were like Roxy Music, but we had three Brian Enos. That was the ideal for us. We all wanted to be Eno. Nobody wanted to be anything else. But so Eno was very significant, and Can and Kraftwerk, and we used to go and see the very early gigs for Can and Kraftwerk when they played. So yeah, German music, and that all that opened up a new world for us as well. Looking at other kind of electronic music from Stockhausen and Edgar Varese, and all of a sudden we were opened up. Those people opened up this kind of world of literature and art and different things that were really appealing to us. So there was that European sensibility that I think we latched into. We weren't really into rock, and so these were kind of people who were offered a clue and a kind of a gateway out of making music, but not within a rock kind of tradition, which wasn't what we didn't want to do that, and we couldn't, we weren't capable of doing it.
It's kind of interesting. The first show that you see kind of always leaves an impression one way or the other. The first show I saw was unfortunately in that realm, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. and I wish that I wish that I hadn't seen that show first. But
can I stop you there for just one moment before you say any more? Benj will love you for the rest of his life. He grew up on he's kind of in.
Yeah.
He gets why we all hate it, but that reference. So you're okay. You're on safe ground there.
So at the time, we learned what we didn't like about, say, Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and the rest of these things by sort of, say, the emergence of punk. But like I was wondering at the time, before you had punk and you had, access to, say, education about Burroughs or Byron Geising or even this album. I don't know if you ever heard this Stockhausen.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this at that time, if you got it at the right time, you would be like, okay, what have I tapped into here?
Yeah,
it's like a world kind of like left in the dark before say, punk kind of like brought out the unique sort of ability to express yourself more uniquely and not be tied into, say, a cliche. And it seemed like you guys early on tapped into a resource which found you searching for the right type of instruments, like tape recorders. And I've read that you would find drum machines that would be from like organs and like the old organs that would have those old style drum machines. That's brilliant. Did you actually end up with a working collection of these drum machines that you then used for your first recordings of Cab?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the kind of paradigm shift for us as working, was because I think we understood. Obviously it was something that I became very interested and absorbed in, was rhythm. But I think as a band, we didn't know how. We loved the idea of repetition and that tribal thing, so we originally, rhythms for us were things that were created by tape loops. So we would create tape loops for rhythms. So the real shift was when we managed to get a drum machine, and it really did change. It really did change everything for us, in that it gave a structure. If you've got a rhythm that anchors things, you can do all kinds of mad shit on top of that. And that was what it was. It was like, okay, this anchors things, and we can do whatever we want around it. And so it allowed the music to be fluid, but also had a kind of a drive to it. And yeah, we just didn't know it. To be quite honest, Kevin, we didn't know any drummers anyway. We couldn't really add a drummer doing anything, because we hadn't got a clue who a drummer was. Like you might as well have asked us to find a fishmonger or something that we knew. I don't know any drummers, so we had to get. A drum machine was a big change for us, and it really meant we kind of could become a different thing, and it also meant we could play live. And the first drum machine we got, people probably read about it before and one talks about it, but yeah, we bought it off a bloke in the back of a shop with a wooden leg. He was great. We went into this music shop and we were looking at these drum machines. There was only two music shops in Sheffield at the time. This one was called Musical Sounds. The other one was called Carlsborough. So we're in Musical Sounds and we're looking at these drum machines. And there was this bloke who looked very dodgy, like a Dickensian character. And he's going, "You don't want to get that shit." And we were going, "All right, mate, leave it alone." We're chatting to the guy in the shop, and he's going, "There's this." And there can't be many drum. I don't really know what we were looking at the time. Probably wasn't even drum machines. And this guy, whatever we were trying to buy, this bloke was going, "Nah, you don't want that." Anyway, as we left, he was hanging around, and he went, "Come here," and he took us into the car park round the back, and got in the back of his van. He went, "Here, this is what you want," and sold us this Farfisa drum machine. And to be quite honest, I don't know, to this day, I've no idea who this guy was, and I've never seen him since. But he actually has quite a significant part to play in the history of Cabaret Voltaire. Yeah, this bloke with a wooden leg selling us a drum machine out of the back of a van in a car park, for about 20 quid or something. And it was wonderful. It was battery operated. And yeah, we subsequently, ended up buying quite a number. And yeah, we went through the whole history of them, and right the way through. So drum machines have always been a big part of what we did. I think there's probably still some left. I mean, I left the studio and left the, everything when we sort of like closed the studio down with the cows. I think Richard maybe has still got some of them, but I don't know. I'm not really sure. So he's the one to answer the question of whether there is a museum of drum machines, that we used kicking around. Yeah.
I always think it's most people that get into programming stuff like to try and see if they can figure out which drum machine it is. So first EP, is it the Farfisa drum machine then?
Yeah, that would be on that one. Yeah.
So it seems by this time though, and I, by the way, I love the Industrial Records cassette IRC 35 for the music concrete sort of like style, but it's not an average. When you listen back to that, do you get a little bit surprised that it's quite amazing. I mean, it's like almost like you started off at just a beautiful place of experimental bliss, and I can imagine that you guys also had to learn your editing skills. As you were saying, you were cutting most of that stuff on reel-to-reels, and then how were you gaining knowledge to get effects like without effects in the beginning?
Well, the first tape machine that we had, which was because a lot of those early tapes and those early things were really things that were done up in Chris's loft, because we were, before we had our studio, we had a loft in Chris's parents' house, and we were literally just going up twice a week and just experimenting. And we didn't even, in a lot of cases, we didn't massively, do a recall on what we'd done. We'd just go up, spend 3 hours making something, record it, come back a few days later, do something else. And we did that for years, actually. And that became this kind of, really the basis of what we did. And I think the industrial one was that. But the machine that we had, because we did eventually get a Revox B77, so we got a proper tape recording machine there. But up until that point, we used a TIAC. It was one of the, not the 4-track, but the sort of the four channel, if you know what I mean. So therefore, it was 1/4-inch tape. Could have 4 channels, and you could do sound on sound and bounce tracks back, backwards and forwards. So we've learned, it was layering. What we were doing was layering, really, and layering sound and doing sound on sound. And that was the early skill that we sort of developed, I suppose, was recording sounds on top of sounds, bouncing them down onto other tracks, and also using that machine in its first instance as our first delay, because you could do sound on sound and use the record head and the playback head. And so we were getting primitive delays. It wasn't something we could particularly control the timing of those delays, but we didn't care. We were just interested in collage kind of sounds, really. So we just did it that way. Yeah.
But then something inspired the beat to come into the music, and to it seems that the vocal effects had already been somewhat figured out by then. How did you transition from the sound on sound sets to the I'm going to have a dance beat?
I guess probably recapping then, I think getting the drum machines and getting a Revox as well, because we had actually had a separate machine that we could use to actually record and bounce down onto. So it automatically, we kind of got a system and a structure to what we were doing, which that's why that kind of happened. And using tape loops as well. And the thing, we had a unique way of actually sort of playing live, and it meant we could play live as well as using drum machines for some of the tracks when we played live. We used to have a system of cassettes which were edited down, and Richard would edit them, and there would be the specific length of a particular track. So things like Talk Over or whatever that was on the first EP, they'd literally have a backing tape, but we did it on cassette. But where other people were using a backing tape, and they'd start with a reel to reel, and they'd have their entire set on one reel, we didn't. We had individual backing tracks on edited cassettes. So it was like this weird sort of floppy disk system before there were floppy disks. So we'd turn up to a gig with half a dozen cassettes, you know, titled and with the backing tracks, minimal backing tracks on. And it was great. So we could play those tracks, and we could also go, we automatically had live sets that we could change around. So we never had to do the same set every night. You know, we hated the idea of going, everything was the same. So we literally had these kind of loose backing tracks edited on cassette, and we could play things in whatever order we wanted. Those were that was the kind of basic cab set, was, you know, probably 10 tracks based around either the drum machine or these, you know, sort of loosely kind of constructed backing tracks on individual cassettes.
So interesting. Who was there somebody that had that? I mean, Chris Watson has gone on to be like a BBC sound engineer. Did somebody come into the fold with like engineering knowledge, or was it something that you guys had learned together?
No, Chris was a telephone engineer.
Oh.
So he did electronics. So, and that's why, you know, my vocal sounds, it was great because I get all the components, I buy all the components, and Chris would make me effects. It was great because he had a soldering iron and he could do it. So he was really good at that. And he built a really early synth, which was wonderful. And it was with a couple of oscillators and, you know, and filters on it. And we used it as a sound source on all those early kind of sort of Cabs Attic tapes and the industrial tapes. It was used on that, but quite quickly it was co-opted and used as my vocal effects thing. So in the early days, I actually was able to put, you know, I was literally putting my voice through a synthesizer that Chris had built.
Well, possibly my favorite single. I'm jumping ahead a couple here, but like the vocal effects on this, and possibly the mix and everything in general on Seconds Too Late and Control Addict. There's a lot of fantastic effects on this. Is this still just utilizing the simple drum machine setup?
We'd actually I think that came after Mix Up, so we got some of the money through from Mix Up. So we were kind of big time then. We were on a budget. We had like a couple of £100 to make a single then. So that was done. That was done using an Electro-Harmonix drum machine, I think, one of the early ones, which I love, and Wrangler use it as well. Wrangler have used that one. I think Benj had one, and we dug it out. So it was the standard Electro-Harmonix kind of box that it came in, but it had some really brilliant. The bottom end on that machine is amazing. So that, I think that used that. But what we did do for that, the reason the vocal effects probably were really good was because we actually hired an EMS vocoder for that. It was one in a kind of a rack mounted one. It wasn't one with a keyboard. It was actually, you tuned it in, and we hired it for the day. And Jeff Travis, who was, who had a Rough Trade, Jeff kind of co-produced the single. Well, that's a whole other story, Jeff co-producing it, but because this is terrible. I hope Jeff never hears this, because he wanted to do the single. We were quite happy for him to come along, and we went, actually, if Jeff wants to do it, we can get him to pick up the vocoder in London and bring it up to Sheffield. And that was it. And then he did. And this is the bit that's really shit. So Jeff, if you're listening, no, we didn't mean, but we gave him a dummy channel on the mixer, and we went, that's your channel. You just make sure that you ride that channel and make sure it's up, but there was nothing on it. Anyway, but sorry, Jeff, but that we did, but obviously, Jeff was there for nag, so he's always been, in the early days he was part of it, so a bit rude, but yeah. And there you go, yeah, that's it, yeah.
So, I mean, you must get asked all the time, what's the drum machine on this one?
That's a Selma.
Selma
one, yeah. We'd moved up. That's another. We always have good stories about buying drum machines. we bought the Selma with the money I think that we got. We brought a couple of records out and we got a few, got a bit of money in from royalties. So we went and bought a new drum machine. And I remember we went in one day to this kind of shitty music shop. It was in a home organ shop. That was one of the ones that went with the home organ, but it was a Selma one. And we went into the shop, and obviously the guy looked at us and went, "These three comedians trying to buy a drum machine in my nice music shop," kind of thing. And we went, "Want that drum machine? How much is it?" And we were actually thinking, I'm glad we never did actually. I think we were thinking of trading in the Farfisa one at the time. And he went, "Oh, it's like 200 quid or whatever it was. I can't remember." And we said to him, "Would you do part exchange?" And he looked at us and went, "Oh yeah, what are you going to part exchange it for? A kazoo?" And we went, "Oh, okay, he's taking the piss here." So I remember Chris actually I think we went back about 2 days later and we went, "We want the drum machine." And he thought we were going to try and sort of do a trade-in, and we just went, "Nah," and pulled out a big wad of cash and gave it to him. So, but that was the Selma, and that moved up in the world because that had you could move the little kind of parameter thing, and you got the tom roll in it. That's why Nag has a drum roll in it, because we could actually put a tom fill in that one.
Did Benji find that one as well?
No, actually, no. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to have a word with him. He's going to be mortified there'll be a drum machine he hasn't got.
Yeah, there's got to be that. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I don't think I've ever heard the name Selma drum machine. So
yeah,
I love learning about this stuff. Of course, we skipped Silent Command. Fantastic. Again, like the effects, the balance between the effects and the drum machine and the simplicity. I mean, like Africa Bambaataa, I grew up in Canada in Vancouver on the other side. So, our interpretation of this, as it was coming across, it was completely different. I can imagine than possibly what you intended or what you imagined. It was like fueling the visions of many young, burgeoning underground artists that were kind of like in the punk scene, but were like looking for sort of like this thing that was going to tickle them. And so many people gravitated towards it because it had an attraction also that it was danceable. Somewhere along the way, you must have decided, instead of the tapes and tape edits, that when you picked up the bass and Richard picked up the guitar, was that a natural progression, or was that the need to want to perform live?
No, it's a natural thing. I mean, Richard and I had known each other since we were about 13, 14 years old. And the reason we knew each other, because we were kind of soul boys, and we used to go to the soul clubs, and that was our entry into music. When we were at school, that's what we were into. The first band I ever saw was Booker T and the MGs, and so that we grew up with that. We grew up with all that kind of Detroit sound when we were kids. James Brown and all of that, and also a lot of the ska and reggae and Prince Buster and that kind of stuff. So as kind of rather dodgy young school kids, Richard and I were tearaways, and that was our kind of original music, was that. So I think somewhere in Richard's stuff. Oh, there you go.
Hello.
That's us, yeah. Yeah, so somewhere along the line, we kind of like, well, I don't think it ever left us, Kevin. I think it was that sense of rhythm was always still in there, particularly with Richard and myself. Wow, the back of Western Works. Wow, that's amazing. So we didn't want to be that, and we didn't want to pretend to be that, but we weren't musicians. We didn't want to be a soul band or a funk band, and it wasn't in our interests at all. But I think there was an acknowledgement that was part of our DNA, and that's where we grew up in it. Yeah. Oh wow, Chris has got the Synthy Hi-Fi, and that's the little mixer, and that is the TIAC, the 4-channel tape that I was talking about. Yeah.
What's that on top? You're fiddling with your hand.
Yeah, that was a little mixer. That was Chris's sub mixer that everything went through. All the early recordings actually went through that, and Chris used it live to mix his sort of a tape machine and his keyboard. And yeah, so we actually, you know, we were band that submixed on stage. So it was just a little. It didn't have any EQ on it. It just had faders, and I think it was a 6-channel mixer. Yeah. Oh wow. I remember that gig.
That's a, how many, is that the first US tour?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because when we first came, Chris was with us on the first American tour. He didn't come back on any of the others, but that was the first one, and we were based. We went to we didn't actually do the East Coast. We just did the West Coast. We went to San Francisco and stayed with Vale and Andrea Juno, who were doing research and doing Search and Destroy the writers. So we stayed in North Beach, based there, and we stayed there for about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks almost in the end. And we did all the kind of that strip between San Fran and down to LA. So we did Berkeley. I can't remember where else we did, but yeah, we did about half a dozen gigs, I think, on that West Coast. So yeah,
Quite
it was
early
great.
Early period in time. So did you find that the audiences were, I've heard about at the beginning, playing with, you know, Buzzcocks or bands like that, did you have the feeling that you best not just play something with without a rhythm or you know, a little bit too experimental when you were in a setting like that?
No, I think we were doing that anyway. I mean, we didn't have to try too hard to be sort of how shall I say, radical anyway. I think the rhythm took the edge off the radical bits of everything else. But yeah, but we, you know, I think you know, reflecting on that time, even though we were weird and we were doing things our own way, for us and for ourselves, we didn't see ourselves as trying to overtly be it was just what we were, you know. It was literally what we were. It was this space in between, something that was recognizable, something that had a connection to the music that people knew, but it was also something that was different and arty, and it was something that, it was just what came from us, really. So but we didn't go out, just as we didn't go out to intentionally be musical and be, you know, liked and accepted. We did try and challenge things, but we understood that there had to be some common ground. Otherwise, you don't achieve anything. If there's no common ground and there's no way of anybody relating to you, then it's a complete waste of time. It becomes something that becomes, you know, maybe notorious in some ways. But I think particularly at that time, we knew that there was some of it would connect with people, and that, you know, there was elements of it that were recognizable. We used a vocal, you know, we had a bass guitar, we had a guitar. They may have all been processed and fucked up, but it was dealing with some of the elements that people would recognize. Yeah.
Seems like, you know, your counterparts, people like Bernard Sumner or Andy Gill, David J, have all made statements how they could see at the beginning that you were making music without guitars, and you were inspiring them to really feel confident in the music that they were making as well. So in some ways, I guess you must have felt like you were making a connection with people.
Yeah, and also I think what we were making a connection with was people's attitude, and people, the people you mentioned there, and the people we were connected with. There was an open-mindedness to them. It was, and what we connected with, and what we understood, was that people wanting to do things differently, people wanting to not be cliched, and, you know, try new things and explore new areas and push boundaries. And those people were, but they were just coming from a different space. So I think it was that common sort of purpose and attitude that existed amongst all those people. Even if the tools that we each used were slightly different, the attitude and sense of, you know, new frontiers and changing things was common to all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, very interpretive era. Like I remember being at a party, and then if the party was playing this record,
Oh, with
Walls
the
of
little
Jericho, Eddie's Out,
Eddie's
and
out. Yeah.
the accompanying single. So I don't know. This was really the song, if you know, the EP that if you heard it at a party, the party became a different party. It was a party that was flavored with. You didn't need to do drugs, but if you had been doing drugs, this took it to a new dimension. I don't know. Very amazing EP. What's your thoughts on this period?
I thought that EP was. I thought that was really interesting. That kind of encapsulates a lot of what particularly with that time when Chris was in the band. What we were all about, actually, because it was very weird, very experimental in some ways, but also reaching for new areas. Walls of Jericho and all that. It was starting to acknowledge, rhythm and dance floor and using the 12-inch, but also there was that little element of nag, 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 and it's almost garage sort of surf music that we were into. And so it represents that kind of crossroads of music, really, where we were, it was leaving behind those kind of post-60s punk sort of trash vibes that were there, the new electronic stuff, and also the mad experimental stuff at the same time, and collage things with found voices and bits from the Warriors in there. So it's kind of like quite messy, but also I thought the interesting thing was we were into the idea of playing with packaging as well, and we brought out a 12-inch and a 7-inch together. They came out together as a package, and so it was that idea of playing with form as well as it literally format and form. So I thought that was it was an interesting record. It kind of captured where we were coming, where we'd been, and where Richard and I probably were going as well after that.
And it kind of seemed like you guys were mixing. You had the idea of sync down. I don't know if you were using multiple drum machines or multiple rhythms, but there were seemingly, your issues in dealing with sync and stuff on an early time was very effective as well. I don't know.
I think some of that's probably luck more than anything else, Kevin. To be quite, sometimes these bits where I did, because we were quite deliberately not pure machine music in the way that Kraftwerk were. We love Kraftwerk, but we didn't want to be Kraftwerk because they represented that purity, a beautiful purity of technology. There was something about us that was we wanted to be a bit hybrid. We wanted to there was dirt in in what we did. There was, so it was kind of interesting to do that. So we were actually using things that were very machine-like and drum machines and sequencers, but we were playing on top of it. There's one track, I think, Discono, which I think probably came out with Kraftwerk, and I listened to it not that long ago, and I was quite stunned by the fact that it was a live take of me and Richard playing bass and guitar together to a drum machine, and I was like, how could we have been that tight? But we were actually quite tight. So I realized we probably did, but between us, Richard and I had an intrinsic sense of rhythm that we could do that. So I was like, oh, wow, we could, but it wasn't sequenced in that way. We actually played live to a drum machine, which was kind of in that way. And it was, it was quite interesting that we did do that, but we were very much about juxtaposing. There was a visceral side, a dirty side to us as well.
It's very tight, and I'm also really noticed that the effects on Richard's guitar, I don't know if it's a phaser or a flanger. It's like kind of like the signature cab sound, and you would have kind of like a flanger or something phaser on your bass at certain times.
It was better. I used to use an envelope follower and a flanger largely on mine, and a graphic as well, and different things. Richard, in the early days, was using Watkins, sort of copycat delay. That was a common delay that we used in the day. But also, Richard was using face pedals as well, yeah, and fuzz and that. We didn't have millions of pedals, but we were, we did use those effects, primitive kind of harsher effects, yeah.
So interesting. In 1982, you guys went to Japan and recorded the album High in Tokyo. In that era, it was called the Showa era in Japan. It was quite a bit different than it is now. Your perspective on playing out of the country and playing this music for other people, what was your take on that?
Japan was such a massive culture shock. I mean, in a really good way as well. I mean, we've been to Europe, we've been to the States, we'd seen that, but Japan was just something we weren't really prepared for. But also, it was such a wonderful time to go. That was when Japan was sort of, in some ways, at its kind of peak, both technologically, and it was interesting because it was at a time when Japan still retains so much of its own kind of national identity, and it hadn't lost that. But it was also this kind of futuristic city, and it was just mad for us. And obviously, such a different language, language and culture and everything. But it was amazing. We were completely blown away. We loved it. I have to be honest with you. The only reason we did High was to stay in the country. We did that purposely. I mean, our record label, we were on a major, I think, at the time, or quite a good label at the time in Japan, and they recorded the Tokyo shows. I think it might have recorded the Kyoto shows as well, and they said it would be really good to do a live album. And we went, yes, but it'll only work if we can stay in the country for an extra week or 10 days and mix the album live here in Japan. And they went, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So, but it was literally so we could stay longer, because it was just, you don't know when you're going to, get the chance to come back. And we were just blown away by it, because it was this wonderful kind of mix of, tradition and futuristic vibe. And we were lucky as well, because it was during the spring, so it was during blossom time and all this. So we got this wonderful kind of experience of being visiting, traditional Japan and Kyoto and all that, but also this high-rise, mad, techno-futuristic world that was going on at the same time. So yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah, it was really good.
So, I mean, that must have been a strange time, because here you had, I guess, Chris Watson making the last record with you guys, 2x45, before that happened, and his departure. How was that? Was that an odd thing, or did that seem unusual at the time?
Well, no, because the backstory to that was really what had happened about 2 years. Well, no, not even 2 years. I would say probably 18 months before that. Chris had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and so therefore, and this is at a time when medically that doesn't mean as much now, but at that moment it was quite, it was something that had to be taken seriously into consideration. And Chris's lifestyle and what he wanted, how he was able to do things, didn't really lend itself in his eyes to being able to do the things that probably we would have done, and doing more gigs and touring and all. The lifestyle of being in a band at that time and doing all that stuff didn't sit as easily if you were, and it wasn't just that. I think Chris wanted to go and do other things, and he was with Maggie, and he was talking about having a family, I think, even then. So it was just a lifestyle thing. And also it wasn't as if we entered music as a career thing, like, oh, come on, we're going to be stars and all. It wasn't that. It was like, we were just doing shit. And Chris was like, I probably want to do something else right now. And he wanted to look, be more involved in sound and, do that. And he'd come from unlike Richard and myself, who'd been at college and at university and done sort of shit jobs and everything. Chris had actually come from he was actually a professional in that sense. He was a telephone engineer, and he loved it all. But I think he was like, he wanted to find his own path. So it wasn't sort of difficult. We totally understood it, and also from his health point of view, we were like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's absolutely fine, and he probably works harder and travels more and does more than any of us now anyway. So and he's in fine form and he's in good health, and I see him, and so it wasn't a worry in that sense. But I could see why he probably went, I want to do something else, and. Yeah, Richard and I were probably a little bit more sort of not rock and roll, but we were party guys, really. We were single. We were whatever at the time. So it was we were just on different flight paths at that moment. But yeah, it wasn't sort of anything more than that.
It's not like he left at a low point. I mean, the 2x45 and the Red Mecca album, of course, were both #1. UK indie albums, so it's like kind of like leave while you're on top is like a good idea.
Yeah, good statement.
But then I gather this is the time when you thought that Some Bizarre and Steve-O would be this would be the next step and the next sort of movement forward and more new equipment.
Yeah, that was quite strategic on our part from me and Richard, because we'd reached a point where things were kind of going well and things were evolving, but we had two kind of pathways around kind of opened up to us at exactly the same time. One was the fact that Steve-O was interested in working with us, and he'd set up a label, and he'd been sort of working with Soft Cell and Depeche Mode, and he'd kind of done the compilation, and he was really keen to get us work with us. And the other pathway was that we'd started working with a guy called Paul Smith, and Paul we talked about the idea of working with the film side and doing our own label, doing the video label, which was Double Vision. So we kind of hooked the two things up together. Yes, that's one path, and they both that and Crackdown really came at the same time, to be quite honest, Kevin. In that, I think the deal was with Steve-O, he loaned us the money to get things going with Double Vision. We needed the money to do that, just to kind of get things going with Paul, and that was where the Crackdown came in. So that was the deal that did the other deal, basically. And because we'd started doing the video stuff and working with Paul, it was kind of became part of the deal with Virgin. We said, Steve-O said to Virgin, they're going to be running their own label to do their own arty films and all this kind of stuff. So we felt we were trying to get the best of both worlds, really, in the sense that we wanted to we knew that we were getting more successful, and that makes you go, okay, well, how do we work with that? And our way of working with it was to go, well, we want to make sure that one side feeds the other. So if we're making music for Virgin, it gives us the freedom to do our own stuff with Double Vision. So that's how we did it. And also the deal being with Virgin was a way of getting a 16-track studio, which we did. So we were able to then become, our money that came from Virgin was invested in our own studio. That's how we did it, really. And then we built it up from there.
So pretty much everything's still all being recorded at Western Works then?
Yeah. We did, the Crackdown was done in London. We did that at Trident Studios because Steve, quite rightly, we didn't really have the sort of the level of technology to do a record that we probably thought we could sell to a major in that sense, in the way Steve-O wanted it anyway. So yeah, and they had offices. Their offices were above the Trident Studios, which is it's studio like the Beatles and John Lennon and Bowie and all that used to work in, but they're in Soho, and the Some Bizarre offices were upstairs. So he did a deal and went, I've got you a week's studio time. I think because basically we got the studio time because it was just coming up to Christmas, and so studio time was, pretty easier to get hold of because no one was recording in that time. So we did the week that kind of came up to Christmas and recorded we literally did the album in a week. I think it was probably about 10. I think it might have even been about 8 or 9 days we did it in, and we just turned up with Al was drumming with us, so we turned up with a drummer and drum kit and just a load of equipment, and just met Flood in the studio, and they went, "This is the house engineer. You're going to be working with him." And he went, "What you doing?" And we haven't got a fucking clue, but we got all these drum machines and stuff. And yeah, the result after about a week was the Crackdown. Yeah.
So you didn't write stuff ahead of time and then bring it with you on your tapes. You put yourself in the position to write this album in the studio with Flood.
No, I'd probably spent a bit of time writing words down, and we probably messed around on the drum machines, but it was pretty, we always worked quite sort of spontaneously anyway in the studio. We didn't pre-plan. The studio for us was a way of notating. So when you plug things in the studio, that's when you start writing. So because it's technology driven. So no, we literally just turned up and started fucking around in the studio. But it was nice for us because it was a proper state of the art studio with good mixing desk, etc. So we were kind of lucky. And obviously Flood, he was the in-house engineer at the time. I think it was more coincidence. It just happened to be on Flood's shift that week he was working. So we ended up working with him, yeah. And then we went on and did microphones with him after that, yeah.
The guys from Nine Inch Nails have always said that they thought Flood was the best producer that they ever worked with. And I've heard that from a couple of people. Does he just bring out the creativity in a good way, or help support an idea no matter what direction?
Yeah, I mean, Flood was just a lovely guy, open to everything, try anything, do anything, but also he was very creative and artistic in his own ways. Obviously, he's done loads of stuff, so that was never in doubt. But obviously we were lucky to work with him in the early days before anybody had seen that, but it was always there. He was just a very encouraging, enthusiastic, supportive and creative engineer and producer as well, because even though he was he was the engineer as such, he got that. We learned so much from him. He was just, it's the first time we'd really worked properly with an engineer in any sense.
What sort of stuff did you learn from him that you felt that you applied to your music that you probably didn't think of before? Was there a particular Flood thing you learned?
I think, do you know what? I think it might have been Flood that introduced us to the idea of gating and keying, actually. So I think we created, on the Haiti track and a couple of other things, we learned that trick of using noise gates and actually using triggers and using things, which became a whole, because we didn't have that many sequencers. So a lot of the cab stuff was actually created using noise gates and using keys. So we did a lot of that actually in the studio. And I remember doing a little bit of that in the studio there, but also we just an awareness, because, we were listening over really good speakers and working with really good amps and working with good EQ. So just an appreciation of sound, of sonics, of the actual, the actual quality of sound.
Yeah, there's no doubting that just Fascination, the Crackdown became like, in Canada where we were, it was like, dance floor filler, absolute hit, I think you might call it. And luckily at the same time, you were able to collaborate with John Roby,
Yep.
the Arthur Baker crew, on Yashar, and again another floor filler. And I guess at this time, the sort of like advent of electro and the whole sort of birth of that was notable. How was it that what was your impression on seeing the birth of the birth of this music coming from America?
For us, it felt like, in some ways, for us, it felt like this was our punk. if you know what I mean. It was like, in the sense that it was a period of music and a style of music and using technology-based stuff that was changing everything. And so the electro stuff that was coming out of New York, I mean, you know, we kind of, you know, the origins of all were already there in some ways for us, because we were aware of Peach Boys and D-Train and all that kind of stuff that was doing those kind of sort of dance floor electronic stuff. So it emerged out of that. But yeah, then when Bambaataa started doing stuff, and Grandmaster Flash obviously doing that and using cut-ups and using, because that was another element, using those found sounds and all that. For us, it was like, oh wow, this feels like a revolution to us. This is people using technology and found sounds and records and, you know, cut up things. And that it was like, okay, this is kind of quite groundbreaking for us. It's what we were doing and what we were into, but they were doing it with their own kind of sensibilities and their own kind of take on it and their own artistic kind of thing. So it was, you know, it was brilliant. And I think they obviously recognized it in us, and the link really probably being New Order as well, because New Order started working with Arthur, and it all happened around the same time. Bernard started hanging out with John Robey a bit and came over to Sheffield and came to Western Works. So John Robey came over to Western Works, and that was kind of the evolution of some of those things when we were doing Yashar. Yeah. So yeah, it was fun. We got it, and also because it also harked back to some of our early, Richard and myself, that kind of funk and, you know, the black music that we were very much into. So it kind of all aligned for us, really.
Also interesting that you were able to link up with Factory Records. There's a lot of labels now that would never let you do that. You know, what, gonna go release something on Factory? It's like, I gather also at the beginning, you know, when you were with Rough Trade, I get it, just sort of a lucky fluke that Factory didn't come up with the money quicker. Otherwise, you probably would have been a Factory band all along.
Or if Joy Division hadn't been around, because Tony only really had enough money and he was putting it into Joy Division. So good for him. I'm glad he did.
It must be incredible for so many people to speak of the times that you were around, and so many iconic figures came out of this time. Yourself, I mean, you're a walking icon, basically. You know, all of your friends, the musical friends. At the time, did it feel like that this was, you know, really an important time in music that you were witnessing and taking part of?
I think underpinning it all, and it's why we all made music in the first place, and I'm sure New Order would say the same. You had that thing where you went, I think we know what we're doing. I think we're doing something a bit different. You had a kind of self-belief, not an arrogance, but there was a bit of cockiness in what you did. So we, you know, and music was quite, I mean, music still is tribal, and you'd kind of go, well, those bands are a bit shit, we're loads better than those. So it's just that vibe, a little bit of competitiveness and all that. But that was all it was. It was never more than that. I suppose now history has said, oh, wow, yeah, well, you were a bit better than, you know, I'm not talking about myself, but obviously, well, you know, they were a bit better. Maybe we were, but, you know, so it was just that little bit self-belief. It's, you know, it's a thin, you know, it's a narrow kind of, you know, tightrope between self-belief and knowing that you've got to do things and being kind of slightly arrogant and cocky and knowing that you're on doing the right thing. But you've got to have a little bit of that in there, because it pushes you forward. You've got to have that little bit of belief that you are doing something that's a bit different, that is changing things a little bit. And also, you know, you were fed by the fact that, you know, Enemy or magazines or whoever and people buying records would reinforce that belief of going, oh, actually, yeah, people are recognizing it now. And I think there was that a little bit. But I suppose, like everything in your life, I think if you're experiencing it and doing it, you don't live it and don't do it with the expectation you're going to look back and go, it's really important. It's just your life. You're just doing it. You know what I mean? And you go, yeah, I think what I'm doing is all right. Yeah, I think it's okay. And that's about it, really.
remaining humble and having the blindness to it is probably the best blessing that you could have. At the time, though, say like around the time of Microphonies, in between, then I often make reference to this album, the Elephant Table album, compilation of difficult music. So what I kind of refer to this as like Dave Henderson from Sounds magazine, kind of like started writing an article about the wild planet scene, as he called it, and the wild planet scene, as he defined you as you were one of the first generation experimentalists, and that you went on to inspire this entire group of second generations, which ended up being like a whole bunch of bands, from SPK, Nocturnal Emissions, Portion Control, Chris and Cozy. Well, Chris and Cozy came from Throbbing Gristle, but you know, this whole next direction of music that I kind of felt like, in some ways, that we were a part of, Skinny Puppies, kind of like a second generation, as inspired by the masters. Were you aware of this at the time?
I know all the bands, even if I can't remember the compilation, but yeah, I saw 400 Blows in there as well, and I was thinking before about it's I don't see it in terms of we inspired them. I just think I think the times just throw those. I'm sure we did, and it's lovely to know that. But I think everybody's kind of a product of their times and of their influences. So I think, as I say, it goes back to that idea of we're all kind of links in a chain, or it's part of a sort of a chain letter that's moving on. So it's lovely to think that we represented a time and a period that had significance that could then go on and affect other people. It's nice to feel as though and those bands included will feel this. It's nice to feel a leader rather than a follower, and that's a lovely thing to sort of go. But it's just, all it is that I think at certain times people are willing to take risks, and I think in large part that's because you don't do it for the money or the acclaim. You just do it because it's something you want to do or feel you have to do, and you don't give it's like, fuck the consequences. This is what this is what we do. And I think having a belief and having a kind of something that you're willing to stick to, then it does eventually pay off, I think. And so it's nice to think that, we didn't pack in, or we didn't go commercial, or we didn't do all those things. We just kind of kept plugging away and doing things we wanted to do, and it has longevity if you do that.
Yeah, and it's aged so well too. I've had a really good time listening to. I like to listen to material before the week, before I speak to someone. It's like, it's been fabulous just revisiting all these, and it's kind of funny because, each time I listen to 3 mantras, I swear I perceive it differently. Depends on what year you listen to and how old you are. It's
have you ever played? Have you played the Eastern mantra backwards?
Oh no.
Oh, okay. That's all I'm going to say to you. Okay. A whole world will if you've got it, you'll have to sort of do it backwards, I suppose, by hand. But it's funny, actually. It's very sorry, I thought you might have known what that was, the Eastern mantra. Okay.
No, you want to explain a little bit more for the people?
Okay, you probably, in case you do it and it's if actually, now I've said this, you probably hear it and you'll go, oh yeah, I can tell what it is. But it's actually, the Eastern mantra is a tape loop of us, me, Chris and Richard saying the Human League. And we turned it backwards and made a loop of it, and we made the Eastern mantra out of it. Phil knows it's okay, he's fine with it.
That's so awesome that really you had the camaraderie with the Human League and the Heaven 17 guys, British Electric Foundation, I think you might call. Did they start? Did you help them start in the Western Works, or was that something that?
No, I spoke to Martin last week, actually. We did a podcast together, and I spoke to Phil about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Phil's still as kind of crazy and lovable as he ever was in his own Phil Oakey way. He's brilliant. And I spoke to Martin. We were chatting about that. They kind of, Martin reckons that we did kind of inspire them to do certain things, but they came from a kind of a more arty theatrical area. They were so it was Martin, Glenn Gregory, and Addy from Clock DVA. So they were doing things, but I don't think it was fully formed or musical, and certainly not electronic. So I think we gave them a kind of, I think probably gave them a bit of a nudge in terms of, or a nod to where they would go, and electronic music became that. But they didn't sort of look at us and copy us. No, they were kind of doing their own thing, but it was their band, they had a band called Musical Vomit. So that kind of captures that, but you know, they were doing that kind of thing. But no, and there is a legendary gig where me, Richard, Chris, Glenn, Martin, Addy all played together. We did a gig, Blind Drunk. I can't remember what we were called the Studs, I think. We did one gig together. So no, in Sheffield, it wasn't that competitive in that way. We had to be supportive because, you know, basically we were from Sheffield, so nobody took any notice of any of us. So there was no kind of tall poppy syndrome there. It was we were all short poppies as far as the rest of the world were concerned. So we were all supportive of each other really in those early days. Yeah.
What was the ultimate gig? Did you ever have like your ultimate show? Your favorite show?
Wow. You know what? No one's ever asked me that. That's an interesting one.
Like a memory that just couldn't not happen again.
I think we did 2 nights at the Town and Country Club in the early 80s, mid 80s, probably about 84 or something like that. And we did 2 nights at the Town and Country Club. And I think that's what we were electro-y, hard, energetic, visual best. I think probably those couple of gigs probably captured that. And I think I enjoyed that. That was around Centuria time and all that. So yeah, I think I do remember that, you know. And you also go, wow, we're doing 2 nights at a big venue in London, not 1 night, 2 nights. So you kind of go, oh, I remember that, yeah.
Microphonies and Sensoria, I mean, that was really like where, especially in America, MTV picked up on the video, and that one shot that you have in the video, I think it's on a pole and it's going up. It just looked like it would cost $1 million at the time when the video came up. It was what, Peter Kerr?
Yeah, who's over there? He lives over there with you guys in Santa Barbara. Yeah. I'm still in touch with Peter. Yeah, we'd met Peter. We met Peter at a press screening, an early morning press screening of Apocalypse Now. That kind of puts it into context. Richard, myself, and Pete had all blagged in to see a 9 o'clock Monday morning showing of Apocalypse Now. Imagine what that did to someone's brain. We were fucked up for quite some time. And that's where we met him, and we hooked up and worked with him, you know, for many years. And he's a wonderful sort of director and very creative, yeah. And he does think, yeah, he lives in California himself and does films and does kind of local things as well. So yeah.
And made the Johnny Yes No film with the music by Cabaret Voltaire. It was a time when I guess all of a sudden video was becoming important and a new form of language by way of TV culture. And so I remember doing really well. Like, I mean, it in Canada, it was definitely something that you had to reckon with. And still, you hadn't played in Canada. So we were all itching for the time to come. The video was named by the LA Times Video of the Year. It was featured in the New York Museum of Modern Art. I don't know. Did you work? Was that still a Flood production, Sensoria?
We did that with Robin Scott, who was he did pop music. He did that famous sort of single pop music. We worked with Robin on that. God, that was that's a whole other that's a whole book, that doing that, the talking about that one. That was mad. Robin was, we'd done the original recordings, because the single is actually 2 tracks put together. It's Do Right and Sensoria put together, and we'd done the album with Flood. We'd done the album with Flood and the album versions of those 2 tracks. But then when we did the single, Rich and I said we wanted to work with Robin. He'd not really done that many mixes, or we knew him from that track, and we asked if he'd do it, and he was strangely he came up with these really mad ideas. He's quite mad. He was quite mad. Excuse me. At the time, he was heavily into Malcolm McLaren, and Malcolm McLaren was very much into that kind of, Buffalo Stance and all that kind of stuff. So he kind of lifted a bit of that. He liked the electro vibe, and also wanted to bring in African sort of vocalists. That's why the single has got the African vocals on it. But the other thing you did, which the reason I'm saying it's a whole other story, a mad story, is that he went, "Oh, I've listened to the album," and he goes, "Do Right and Sensoria are in the same tempo and the same key. Let's do a mashup of the 2." And we were like, "Okay, that sounds good." But Robin's idea of doing a mashup, which was mental, was to actually edit the multi-tracks. So we went through this whole process of actually bouncing the multi-tracks. It took forever. I remember Flood working, and we mixed it in the studio. We did it in the studio in Soho on Wardour Street, and it was just a mad experience. But no one, so it's, the idea of doing 2 tracks and doing a mashup nowadays is easy. You sample, you do it, whatever. Or we could have even done it with the idea of 1/4 inch, but we did it by mashing up all the tracks on 24 track. And to this day, I'm not quite sure how we did it, but we did manage to do it. And Sensoria was the result of that, yeah.
You had extra artists playing with you by this time, people that had appeared before, like Eric Random, but you're adding Mark Tattersall from Hula. Is he from Hula? Roger Quayle, Alan Fish has been in the scene here and there. What was the change in equipment that had happened by this point? I gather you had established a new bunch of gear when you made Do Right and Sensoria.
Funnily enough, live-wise, it wasn't radically different. We probably chucked in some more drum machines, and we were using the SP12 sample machine,
really?
Juno 60, that kind of stuff. But in actual fact, most of the stuff, because we still saw ourselves as essentially studio based, most of the equipment was going into studio equipment. So we were buying more processors and things like that, more sort of noise gates, compressors, harmonizers, delays. So we were actually, rather than buying the instruments that you placed up, we weren't buying as much keyboards or those kinds of things or sequences. We were actually investing more in kind of outboard gear for the studio, really, and then we adapted it for live. So that tended to be where the money went, and we upped the studio to 24 track as well at that time. So
a tape machine? Would that have been a tape machine, a 2-inch?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so we were using Soundcraft. We had a Soundcraft desk. We had the old Blackwing studio desk, which was which Depeche Mode had used. Loads of all their recordings Daniel had used. So we bought that and their 20, and we got their 24 track machine after that. So we were using that. So yeah, but that's what we were doing. Yeah, but we still saw studios kind of our home, so we tended to put the money in there.
What was the classic Sensoria sequence sound, like the arpeggiated sequences?
That was Juno 60. Juno 60 was used kind of quite extensively on a lot of the stuff. We tended to do that. I can't remember that we didn't bring many extra keyboards in. Richard was quite happy working with what we had, so we didn't bring too much more in. A few effects here and there or things like that, but we didn't go whole hog. We were quite minimal. I think Richard probably today still uses the Juno on most things as well. Yeah.
And what about the sequencer? I gather at this time '84, you're still not into computers, so you're probably using a hardware sequencer of some kind.
Yeah, it was Roland. We had a Roland sequencer really, but again, we'd use little sample things as well, like the SB12. We'd use that for 2-bar sort of samples and use them as sequencers. So, and you know, again, like I said before, using keys and gates. We didn't have loads of samplers, and we just used triggers really more than anything else, and use CV gates for things. Yeah.
I could believe the other day I was looking at a guy that was selling his SB12, and it's like, can you believe they're like worth like $8,000 to $10,000 now?
Oh my God.
I know. I was like, I couldn't believe it. Needless to say, I sold mine.
Yeah, damn.
I mean, you must have felt like dance floors were swallowing up the material as you were making it. And you leave the studio, you probably felt like, oh, here we go, another great dance floor song.
I think, do you know what? I don't think we never really. It was nice, but we weren't kind of obsessed with that. We eat chart stuff and everything. We just kind of we moved on. We didn't kind of. I don't think we thought too much about it. We just kept doing it and hoping that people liked it. To be quite honest, yeah, yeah.
Did the Some Bizarre Steve-O situation ever pressure you guys as to try and do something that you weren't doing, or did they feel that did you feel they were just supporting your every decision?
Yeah, Steve-O was. No, I don't think Steve-O was more into sort of pushing Steve-O really than anything else, so he didn't. You know, it was. I think it wasn't a case of him changing us. It was making sure that he had. I suppose that he had some kind of visibility in that as well. You know, so you know, Steve-O's quite a mad character, and in his own way, he just wanted, you know, he pushed us to be madder more than anything else. I don't think it was more commercial. I mean, you know, I think what he did have was a sense of he had a sense of the commercial and marketing. So his idea was to get weird people or weird bands like us, or obviously Psychic TV or Neubauten or Yellow, and not change them, but you know, use the kind of the machine as it was to make them more successful, and to sort of have a place. That was the Dada thing for him. You know, he wasn't really into Dada. I don't think he knew, but the idea was to make that weird, use the machinery of the, you know, the kind of commercial music industry. You know, use that machinery to kind of work for the weird people. I think it was like he hated the fact that it was all geared towards shit music. It was like, no, use that machinery to make these interesting artists successful.
Coming from afar, you know, it was really exciting because, you know, the right type of artists were seemingly being supported. I should mention your relationship with Neville Brody. Fantastic artist doing a lot of your artwork. This is a pretty long. He did a lot of your covers, starting with Red Mecca, and even working all the way up to your new album.
Yeah, Neville did the first one he did was the 3 Crepuscule tracks for Crepuscule. So yeah, I met Neville when he was still at university at college in London, and he was really into the music, into the band, and said, could I do a sleeve for you? I think we said, yeah, if we don't have to pay you. And that's how it started, and then that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship, and yeah, it's all good. And yeah, I mean, I'm still in touch with Neville. Yeah, so yeah, he's still, you know, he's still there. He's still a kind of quite a legendary figure in the world of design and typography, and he's fit and fine and wants to catch up, but we can't because we're in lockdown. Yeah,
it's great though when people like stick with their long-term friends and keep on collaborating. My friend Stephen R. Gilmore, who actually asked me to ask that question, has been our artist since before we made our first album. He actually made our first album cover to entice us to make an album. So it's like, okay, better.
Well, you know, we're from a period which I think is so important, where, you know, the idea, it's the things that come with it's the context in which music sits that is very important, and artwork and packaging and the visuals and the whole aesthetic and the whole look of things is so important, because it was still about, or at that point, and still is for me, because I still love vinyl and we still look, you know, doing cassettes and things like that. I think that idea of I don't never want to lose that, because music sits within a broader context, and artwork and people like Neville are so important in it.
Yeah, and then as time progressed, April 1985, I found myself on a plane flying out to Toronto, Canada, where Cabaret Voltaire was going to make their first Canadian show. I had to be there, and I met you. You signed my book.
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
You guys were so nice. I guess that's Mark Tattersall with you, right?
Oh, Patty, yeah. Brilliant. Oh, that's wonderful.
So I got to go and at the concert hall in Toronto and see the show. I gathered that was still for microphonies. I'm not sure if The Arm of the Lord had come out yet, but it was fabulous. It had everything that this kid needed to see. And not only that, what I really liked about it, I was lucky because my friend was a famous DJ out there. So he walked me right up to you at sound check. You know, just, there was no door that he couldn't walk through type guy. But you guys responded very, very politely. And I always thought that, man, you were one of the nicest guys when I met you. And we went out later that night to another club where I think Chris was DJing, Chris Shepherd, and had a great time. And I always thought, like, wow, what a nice guy. So I don't know. I think there's also the power of like, you know, making something that's inspirational, but also backing it up with being humble. It's like it's a hugely beautiful factor. Has that remained important to you, to have fun, but to also remain quite humble about everything?
Yeah, I don't think I work at it. It's just how I am, really. I suppose it's just work. I just don't. I don't think anybody likes people. I mean, there's times when you got to be straightforward and blunt with people, and if somebody's sort of being an idiot, then you say it. But I always believe that, you know, in the first instance, you should always be polite and respect people until there comes a point where you go, hang on a minute, I'm going to put a stop to this. But no, and most people, pretty much most people that have always come to, have been really nice, and so they deserve that respect. And, you know, we're musicians, we're artists, we're just ordinary people. I've never seen myself in any other way. So there's no reason to be a dick, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've met a couple people where, you know, I went up and I started saying, hey, you know, something about them, and then they'll give you sort of like the look away, and then just like those type of simple little things like that. I took note how much they affected me at a young age, say by someone who will go unnamed. But but later, you know, this is 1 second long interaction with you, this carried by this person forever. I started realizing that when people would ever speak or ask me a question or something like that, that I would always do as you did and be extremely humble. So I take that from you, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I've had some influence.
I remember another time that I was in London, and I think we had played, and there was a Melody Maker party, and you were dressed up as a pirate, but I didn't recognize you because you had an eye patch on, and you came up and you said, oh, "Hey, what's wrong? You don't recognize me?" And I'm like, "Who are? Okay, I think I do." And you've always been like this sweetheart in the times that I've caught up with you. So as the times continued into 1985, and by the way, yeah, that weekend that I saw that show, the next night I went to a cafe. I was having a small gig, and it happened to also be the first American show of Einstürzende Neubauten. And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
wow, what heavy duty weekend as far as like seeing you guys and that, returning back to Vancouver with a report about what everything was like. It was quite a page turn for me, and it was quite, you know, it was like I felt like almost the times were growing quickly. You guys reached the end of your relationship with Some Bazaar and found yourselves making an album, Code, in 1987 with Adrian Sherwood.
Mm.
Quoted as saying, the closest we ever came to making a party record.
Yeah, that's interesting. That, yeah, and to do it with Adrian, to do it with Aid as well. I mean, it was a funny one, that, actually, because we'd signed to EMI and they wanted us to have an engineer, or a producer rather, and they'd kind of foisted a couple of, I don't know, industry kind of characters. I don't know, can't even remember who they were, to do a couple of trial sessions and all that. And it was, you know, we remember Richard and I going, fucking hell, this isn't going to work. But we were really insistent that we try and work with Aid. We wanted to work with Adrian, and it did work. You know, it was sort of, and that was one of the most fun times, really, because Adrian's brilliant, and that opened up to a whole new world as well for us. Obviously, we were really into the On You stuff that Aid had been doing, and then, but it came with it. You know, what happened with there is you've obviously got the, you know, Keith LeBlanc and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, we kind of made that connection, excuse me, with all that world. And Mark Stewart, who we knew Mark anyway, but yeah, Mark was kind of like quite permanent in the studio when we were doing that album. It was free food and drink, really. That's why.
It kind of became the same thing happened to us, actually, where EMI was like said immediately, Adrian Sherwood, or some ideas on this level, which we did end up working with him the following year after you were with him. And I did find it incredibly inspiring to watch him work and to look at his working style, how he was using the AMS delay to basically trigger all of his samples from effect sends. It was pretty amazing. And then you end up with like this record that is got a lot of edge to it as well, that thought was kind of cool. But I thought it was also interesting that Adrian Sherwood is kind of like this like unspoken person that, you know, when it came time for, say, Ministry or Nine Inch Nails, who later became more popular, that their first albums were both crafted by Adrian Sherwood under that setting in the Southern Studios. And so he's really had like a finger on like the pulse of everything, starting from at a certain point, and he got his hands on a lot of things. I'm glad to hear that you love the experience, and I think the end result was also super cool. You were able to work with Bill Nelson on guitar.
Yeah, that was lovely to have Bill there. It was kind of, I think we probably had a little bit of a budget to do that, so it meant we could indulge that, and it was lovely to work with Bill, who, you know, Bill's still kicking around. He's not too well at the moment, but, you know, such a privilege to work with Bill. So, you know, you know, I just feel very lucky that I've worked with these people. Aid being, you know, you're chatting about the way he worked. He's, you know, Aid was just such a physical kind of producer in that way, brilliant to work with, and yeah, so it was good. I've got good memories of that, you know, working on that album and doing those tracks, and it had a toughness and an edge to it, and we did enjoy doing that. Yeah,
it was funny that we were told we were going to go do an interview one day in New York at EMI, and we showed up, and then you and Richard walked into the room, and we were sat down and we were told we were going to do a group interview based on industrial music. It was kind of like this, I think like a few people from universities or newspapers came in and kind of like addressed the questions to us. And I thought like, oh boy, this is like, I'm just going to shut up right now and let you guys do all the talking. Was very, again, a humbling experience. You know, we were shy. We never really said, you know, oh my God, we're here with Cabaret Voltaire. But believe me, we were mildly freaking out.
Oh, it's
and
nice.
again,
It's nice to know you. Yeah, you would. That's flattering.
Most humblest guy ever. As time morphed on, various, I guess, things, components of American culture are starting to re-inject itself into your inspirations, such as the Chicago music roots and Marshall Jefferson, in the Chicago deep house and Chicago house production world. And surprisingly, before that, though, you encountered the world of Al Jorgensen.
It was at the same time. We were moonlighted. We actually, we did that because Marshall was ill for a bit and we had time and we'd seen Al anyway. So it was like, okay, let's go and do some stuff with Al and Chris in the studio. So it was fun. It was two different worlds. You know, it was good working with the house guys. That just strangely evolved that, and we ended up doing it, which was quite odd. We actually ended up with working with Marshall by default because I'd gone to New York to try and track down Todd Terry because we wanted Todd Terry to actually produce that album at that time. We hadn't even done the album. We wanted to do an album with Todd Terry, but Todd wouldn't answer the phone and never came to the phone. but Marshall was in New York at the same time. So we kind of met him and hooked up, and he came to London and met us, and Richard and I got on really well with him. And we were, that was the zeitgeist, you know, the things that were happening in Detroit and Chicago were really interesting for us. So it was like, okay, let's go to Chicago and do an album. It was a bit of a weird thing to do. But it was fun and we met some lovely people, and I absolutely love Chicago. It's such a brilliant city. And but we had this kind of polar opposite world of working with all the house guys at night with Sleazy D and Marshall and Kim Mazel and all those guys. And then, you know, kind of during the day working with Ministry, working with Al and Chris. So it's quite polar opposite, and sort of working in the studio and then going out and getting, you know, having partying with Al. So yeah, it was a fun experience. Yeah. And yeah, that was great. We just kind of cut loose a little bit and had a bit of fun. And there was no pressure on us because we weren't doing an album with Al for EMI. We were just doing it for fun.
Yeah, and Al really definitely did know how to have fun. Those days, it's pretty legendary. You know, Al's kind of carved himself, you know, a legendary name here in America for that period. I heard you got the nickname Biff.
Yeah. Well, we had to do it under. The thing is, we had to do that, you see, because we couldn't do it officially because EMI had paid for us to go to Chicago to do this album. So we couldn't go, oh, and while we're here, we're going to do another album with someone else. So we couldn't use our own names. So that's why we ended up with fictitious names. Yeah.
That's classic. And so the house side of it, how was the studios different? What you learned about working in Marshall Jefferson's atmosphere?
Well, it was weird because the studios we worked in, there were, I mean, you probably know this more than I do, or other people, was that, or maybe not, that at that time, Chicago, the studios were all commercials. It's where they made all the TV commercials. So all the studios were full on, you know, kind of done for TV. They weren't music studios. In fact, they didn't really exist in that way, the studios we were doing. So we ended up working at night. We had to work, which was a bit odd for us. You know, we never, so we'd start working at sort of 6-7 o'clock at night when the day shift had gone. And so we'd work, it was a weird sort of thing where we were working nights there. We'd start at night and finish at sort of 7 in the morning. So it was we were doing night shifts. So it was interesting. Marshall was fun and lovely, and he's quite crazy, and he was. At that time, he played keyboards, but he could only play keyboards when he was wearing a full-length fur coat. For some reason, that was Marshall's vibe. He had to wear his full-length fur coat. And there were just lovely people who we were introduced to, and it was nice. It was just a great experience. And we went to Byron Stingley's family house and we had dinner with all the family and all this. So they were very welcoming, and it was a really nice experience. I mean, it was a funny record to do because it stands at a moment in time, because we made a house record in Chicago that's when house music was being made. So, and it's a bit of a curiosity in some ways, Groovy, Laid Back and Nasty, because it represents it's just a moment in time. I mean, all records are a moment in time, but that was us going to a place. We'd never done that before, and we never did it again. We went to a place and actually did a record that kind of drew on a scene and people that were doing it. So we used some of those, those house musicians, and Byron, I was trying to think, Paris Brightledge sang backing vocals, which for me was great. It was a thrill. I love his stuff. So it was almost like it's an odd record that I don't know whether a lot of people like it. Some people love it, and house people love it because it's got all that. A lot of people who like the cabs, and the traditional and the harder stuff or whatever, don't really like it. But I think you have to sort of appreciate it as something that was just a different record at a particular moment in time, and that was it. And also the other thing was, there was a slight thing whereby we got kind of snubbed for it a little bit, because a lot of people were going, oh, you should be working, we've got our own dance music in England, the Mondays and the Stone Roses and all this kind of stuff. You should be working with English producers. But we were like, that's not our idea of dance music. But I mean, I've worked with Sean Ryder, and I'm friends with the Mondays and I'm good mates. So I'm not knocking those people, but it wasn't what we were at. We were kind of looking in a different world, and we've often looked to a lot of American music, and the other thing being is Derek May did mixes for us. So, I think it was an important time, and it was nice to have something we were actually sort of in some way connected with it because of that record. Yeah.
I think it's successful for what it is. Groovy, Laid Back and Nasty. It's kind of, if you went to anywhere and worked with any producer, you're subject to the results. And the results are something that you have to take those things into consideration. It's the same thing with Al Jorgensen on Acid Horse. The results will be dictated by the studio, by the people and the equipment.
Yeah.
I gather you didn't take any equipment to Chicago, so you were subject to using the 808 or whatever it is.
That's right. We weren't. I think we took effects or things like that because we were limited with what we could take. So hence we had to. We weren't really able to take too much with us. So it was. But at the same time, it was just Richard and myself. We didn't have a drummer with us. We used a percussionist that was there, so it was fine. It was like I said, it was a different record, a different way of working, and completely unique. But that's good. It's good that every record has its own sort of identity, whether you like it or not. It had its own characteristics. Yeah.
And times change, and as times change, you try things to see where. Even I'm sure you guys had a question mark. What will this sound like?
Yeah.
So
I think it was also almost like a last hurrah of us working in that commercial way in some respects as well. We kind of knew that and we were on EMI, and there was a lot of money, and there was a lot of pressure from management as well at that time, from our to do this record. It wasn't all driven by us. I mean, we were happy to do it, and it was great, but there was like, we weren't gonna make a pop record. We couldn't do a pop record, but we could make a club record, and that's what we did. And that was, I guess, even though you could easily say, oh, well, why did you appease EMI? It's like, well, because they'd given us money to make a record, and we wouldn't have, it's what we did. We were aware of that situation, that dynamic of working with a major, but we kind of knew it was the last thing we were going to do. And after that, we just went back and did our own shit on our own label, distributed it, and we were fine with that. So it wasn't as if it led into this whole new commercial world. It was just like, it was almost like the dying commercial sort of stance from us and going, well, this is what we would do if you wanted to make a commercial, sort of a commercial attempting record. And that's what it was, really, I suppose.
And as you headed towards the 90s, 91 Body and Soul, the 10th album, it's the last album with your vocal.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was the world of, say, like, I guess rave techno was kind of like making its introduction at this time, 1992, 1993, when you did Plasticity and International Language. Was that something that you were aware of on your mind? Like, oh wow, what's this new wave of artists, especially even coming out of Sheffield label Warp Records?
Yeah. Again, it was a response to, sort of the world around us, which probably leads, me to think that how the world was changing and we were changing, we've become part of that world, and we've become part of a much broader world. And quite rightly, we've been making music for sort of 20 years at that point, or whatever it was. So, the need to, you can't always sort of be totally ahead of it. Sometimes you kind of we are just responding to the world around us. And we were aware of what, labels, UK labels, like Warp, like Network, or the English Network, not the American one, were doing. And so we were doing tracks that suited that, really, and suited that world. We'd also got, you got the kind of more dubby stuff coming out with, with the Orb and all that, and Orbital. And basically the world of electronic music wasn't using vocals, but we were using samples. So I think we did Body and Soul, and they did Percussion Force as well, which had vocals on it. And then after that, we just sort of did what electronic music of that time, which was really sort of instrumental, sample-based, dubbier, stripped back kind of records, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that they weren't cab, but you could tell, like, the conversation is fantastic, but the whole, you could sense that the word EDM had come into birth. This other scene. It was like the fear of this giant generic scene coming and swallowing everybody up. It's like, avoid the EDM, avoid the terminology.
Yeah.
And as I said, the whole rave era. Did you find a pressure to like, okay, we're gonna have to stick to what we're doing, or we're gonna have to join them feeling?
I think we were partly there in some ways anyway, in the fact it was kind of stripped back electronic, rhythmic body music. So we had that in our toolbox anyway, really. We were doing those kind of we were doing raves, and we were doing Club Dog, and we were doing Groove Rider. We were playing at Groove Rider and Fabio's nightclub. We did Rage on a Thursday night. So we were actually playing at some of those in our own sort of weird stripped back way. Yeah. But it was funny because we were, I suppose it's easier for a band that was new and that was their new world and they were doing it. Whatever happened with us, we were still coming. We had all our history from Rough Trade, Factory Records, Some Bizarre, Adrian Sherwood. So we couldn't just pretend that we were something different. We could only sort of shape what we were, perhaps a little bit. But I think we were just, again, responding to the world around us. And I think some of those kind of more instrumentally records in that period, it fitted. Some of it fitted into that world, and some of it didn't, and that was it, really. I suppose, yeah.
Is it okay to ask how is? I noticed on the new Cabaret Voltaire album, there's no Mal, and it's like it kind of made me wonder why call it Cabaret Voltaire if the two of you aren't involved?
I can't really answer that. It's only Richard who can answer that. I think I've asked that question as well. Yeah. I can't. I'm not going to go into sort of making a mess of of this and giving, you know, food for people and all that. I'm not really sure why Richard, I mean, it's sort of a weird thing. I still have co-ownership of the name. Richard and I don't actually talk. We don't not talk, but we don't talk. And I'm not really sure why. I'm not really sure why he's done it, to be quite honest. I mean, I get paid for it. It's a long story. It's a really, really long story, I suppose. And it goes way back to when we stopped and we finished working in '95, and we finished the conversation, and I went and lived in Australia. I think from that point, even though Richard and I were fine and we were in communication while I was living away, and we were close, as close as could be, but I don't know, for some reason, I think maybe because I left, he feels as though I gave, I don't know, is it like a claim that you have on a gold, you know, a gold, I'm sorry, you've lost your claim, you left. So I'm not really sure, but I mean, I've been asked to, God, I've been offered shitloads of money to do the cabs under, you know, as me. And it's like, well, no, I'm not doing the cabs. I'm not. Cabaret Voltaire is a shared history, the earlier history being with Chris, obviously, and then, you know, the whole history with Richard and myself. So I don't feel as though any of us would probably use the name. Richard feels he can do, and the only thing I can do is either get litigious, and I don't want to do that, and I would never do that. But Richard and I have been friends since we were 14. We've known each other since we were 14 years old. So I think it's a little bit sad, but if he feels that that's what he wants to do, I let other people make their minds up. But I don't really get why he's done it, and I'm probably best leaving it at that, because I don't want to sort of have a go, and I don't want to be, you know, yeah, it feels a bit odd, and I'm not really quite sure. It's just, you know, well, it does feel really odd in the sense that there's probably, you know, including all the early tapes and everything that's come out, there's probably about 50 albums of Cabaret Voltaire, of which I'm on 49 of them, you know, so it feels a bit odd that this, why are you doing it? But as I say, I can't really answer that, and I think a lot of people are a bit mystified. And it may be that perhaps I've gone on and done lots of different things, and Richard, you know, feels as though I don't need it, or I don't want it, or I'm, you know, not entitled. I don't really know, to be quite. Yeah. I must admit, Kevin, I'm not really sure myself. I don't know, but he's done it, and that's the way it is. And you know,
the best of answers that you can give, though, is that just, you know, sometimes, you know, we don't know what's going on, but like, I'll just say, you know, that we're thankful that we have Wrangler, and we're thankful that we have your relationship with Benji in that studio that's able to bring out Dada, and I'm genuinely excited, more so, for what's going to come out of this umbrella. I think you're tapping into the world that the personality is still there, the flavoring is still there, your touch on the effects is still there. Everything that I would want from a cab album, I'm finding in Wrangler. I hate to say it, you know, it really hits a spot for me. And you know, to be quite honest, The Shadow of the Fear had something missing for me, so that was just my honest opinion. But I'm certainly going to follow you and what you're doing. I was interested about your move to Australia. I think that's a thing that we all as people think is a great thing to be able to do at some point, is say, you know, I don't feel like doing this right now or that. I feel like doing something completely different. Was that what your trip, or your moving to Australia was? It's really just like, I need a page change for a while.
Yeah, I think we'd reached a difficult. It was a number of things. It was a number of things that were overlapping that kind of led to that. I think there was a natural thing where Richard and I probably wanted a break because we'd worked so long, and I think because we'd done the instrumental records, it was like, how do we get out of this?
Right.
And where do we go next? And I don't think there was an obvious answer, because, you don't want to go backwards, but I don't think there was a clear path forwards. And particularly at that moment, I still believe that, particularly in 1995, when the world was, we'd moved to CDs, vinyl had gone, everyone was churning out shitloads of music, and it was easier to do that. I didn't want to slip into this thing of doing the conversation over and over again every year. And it's like, well, we need something else. And right now, I don't think that something else is offering itself to me and you. So I think we need a break. And it was a natural thing. And I didn't know how long I was going to be away for. And, so it was one of those situations where, was this permanent or wasn't it not? So it just evolved that way. And and so that's why one side of it. The other side of it was there was literally a practical sort of component to it as well, and that was we were struggling. We weren't signed to a label. We couldn't get. It was really hard to get promo on those Plastics records because it was our own label. We couldn't afford to pay for a press person. The press no one would review our stuff because we were just people bringing out our own music. So we were just struggling. So financially, we were in a bit of a spot. I had 2 young daughters. I'd lost my house. I didn't, and it was like, we can't survive. We got to do something. And I actually, my point with Richard was, there's probably one, you can probably survive on your own. You can do stuff, you've got the studio, you can bring stuff out and make enough money, but there isn't enough money for 2 people to survive on this, particularly when one of them has 2 young children. So I went, I'm just going to change up and try and find another way through this. And I wanted it was in the middle of a, monetary and big recession and all that kind of shit. So there was lots of things. There was a music side, there was a practical and personal side, and there was a financial side. So so I just did that, and going to Australia was I love doing it. It's really odd, strangely enough, because I had to reinvent myself, because I went to Australia, and it was like being in Cabaret Voltaire meant fuck all over there, even though there was people knew who we were and all this kind of stuff. Again, it wasn't, I couldn't earn money just by saying who I was. So I had to find another way, and I had a radio show. I started a record label. I became a promoter. I put on massive gigs, and ran the label and brought out 30 albums on Off-World. And I worked with Sean Ryder. I did so many things, and I wrote my PhD and became a journalist and wrote for magazines and newspapers. So it was like I just did all this mad stuff, and it was like, oh, okay, well, I found a way. It was an interesting challenge to sort of survive in a different part of the world where I knew no one apart from, I was there with my wife and first wife and my 2 young daughters. So yeah, that's what happened. That was literally what happened,
You didn't settle down. You settled up. You got busy.
Yeah, I did. I got very, very busy. Yeah. So, so yeah, that was the Australia thing, and I don't regret it, because I've still got lots of friends there. I had a great time, and my children are grown up with, my eldest daughter's got kids, and so they're settled there, and I'm desperate to get back to see them at some point. But yeah, it's nice. I've got another part of my life. So you just got to deal with what's in front of you, and that's what happened at that moment in time. Was we had to do something, and I did it not for any other reason than it felt like a good solution at the time for both myself and Richard. And he kept the studio, and there was no acrimony or anything like that, and we left on good terms. And I took a year leaving. I didn't just up and leave. It was all planned out so I could do it properly, and I didn't leave Richard or anybody in the lurch or whatever. So just how it was, yeah.
And you formed a couple of bands down there, Sassy and Loco and the Cooling Brothers. Made a few LPs, Boomclat LP, Boomclat, for Off-World, for Sassy and Loco, and the Creech LP.
Yeah.
Here Come the Astronauts. How did you find getting into recording in Australia was any different from what you were doing at home?
We literally did it. It was at the time when technology had changed, so it was all done. It was home bedroom studio stuff. That's what we were doing. It was just done on, samplers, little mixing desk, computer. Everybody trying to get the best software for their Macs and all this. So it was. I worked the same as everybody did really at that point in time. I worked in a bedroom and made music and did it that way. And I made I actually made a living for quite some time as a DJ. That was quite successful as a DJ. The only award I've ever won is a DJ, believe it or not. I was one of the Australians. And I played, did big sort of shows, and it was fun, playing all kinds of music, electronic music as well. So
really nice. I don't know. It sounds like something that, I mean, I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to go and move to Japan. Lived in Japan earlier as a kid.
Yeah, you had your formative years in Japan, didn't you?
Yeah, my dad sent me there as a student for a while, and that was like a period that it's like something you always think about and you want to get back to. You want to do it again, or you want to, it's that thing. So when I hear about your trip to Australia, it kind of gives me that, I get that itchy feeling about wanting to do something big. So you were there for 12 years. I mean, what was the take on it when you thought like, okay, I'm going to move back to Brighton?
It was again, I tend to live in the moment, as you can tell, in that sense. So no, I got asked to come over and do some research stuff over here. And I was still running the label and everything, but I got asked to come over and was asked to do some work for Brighton University, and it was literally that. But the other reason being, I wanted to spend some time with my mum, because she was old. So, and my kids come over and spend some time with me, and my second wife was here, so with me. So I literally came back, and yeah, I spent probably about 6 or 8 months working out what I was going to do, because I'd severed my Australian music links, but my English music links were still there, but not on a practical sort of work a day level. That's when I started working with Steve Cobby. Steve was very important in that, doing the Hey Rube stuff, because it was like I could work with someone, and he got me back into doing stuff. So, and then at the same time, probably about after I'd been here about a year, 18 months, I met Benj, and then it all picked up from there, really. So, yeah, and the rest is recent history.
And so, since you've come back, I gather that you are utilizing a computer to make music now.
Oh yeah. Well, we was doing that in Australia, so it's all right. I'd done that, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a studio at home, and we've got studios in Brighton that I use for the sound art thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm like everyone else. I've got a flight case full of shit, some keyboards, and Ableton, and I do that. So it's fine for writing. I love it. I've done, do remixes here, and I do all those things. So, but then when it comes to time when I want to do something that I hook up with Benj and do stuff down with him to get that kind of the touch and the sound and the feel that I want, because I love being in the studio, and the physical side, it's still there. I miss that, I love being in the studio. So yeah.
So when you're making Wrangler or Dada material, is that also utilizing Ableton or a computer, or is that going back and utilizing just the old hardware?
It's both, actually. I wrote, and that's what I've been doing with the started writing a new one. I mean, I can work here and work from home and sketch things out and do all the rhythm parts and things like that, and then take it to Benj, and we kind of work out, I want to use that sound. So the sketches and the basic stuff is written here on Ableton, and then I go to the studio. Although we did one track which in the new album, which was funny, because I literally wrote it. I did a live mix at home, just did it on Ableton, but I wanted the sound and the richness of being able to get more analog stuff into it. So, and Benj being very painstaking, completely wanted me. We managed to completely recreate a live mix that I'd done. But it sounds exactly the same, but using sort of analog gear, which was quite funny actually to do that. So it tends to be that it translate it. You know, it means I can translate some of the things that the rough ideas that I have, and but also, you know, I can cut loose in the studio. The new album's actually utilizing more in the studio. I'm not going to write as much here at home. I'm going to write the basic stuff, but not as much. But I'm kind of enjoying being back in the studio with Benj doing that. So some stuff's done here. But I've just, you know, I did the working. We work remotely properly for a proper full remote mix. I just did the Working Men's Club mix here. And then I got Benj to put some bits on, and he finished it off down there for me. So we're finding a way in lockdown to do that stuff, yeah.
The vocal effects are so tasty again. The vocoder on satellite, is that hardware or is that getting into
that's where the real studio, I mean, I do all the vocals down there. That's actually that's a Roland old keyboard one, the one that comes, it still looks like a bit of furniture, the wooden one. I can't remember which model it is, but it's beautiful. So that's a proper played vocoder thing. So yeah, you could, some things like that you just can't replicate, and that's beautiful. That is proper old warm analog gear. Yeah,
you can tell. You just can't think that stuff, man.
Oh, well, I love it. You know, like I say, I love working on computers and it's fun, but I still love all that gear. You got to have something with knobs on it, I say.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I was lucky that I held on to all of our old equipment. So I have like our gear from 35 years ago still.
Yeah. Good.
And you know, go back. But so nowadays, are you teaching at the University of Brighton then?
Yeah, I have been. I only work there part time. I don't work. I'm not full time because I still do a lot of this stuff. So I tend to work across different courses. But yeah, basically it's a sound art program we run. So it is about installation art. It is about soundtrack for moving image. It's all about spatial sort of stuff, 3D sounds, interactive work. Our students go and do work on games stuff, and yeah, they do some absolutely amazing things. So, and you know, I love it because I'm you know, I get so much from them. I feel very privileged in that I get to sort of talk to and hang out and speak to younger people from with completely different mindset. You know, these are people who are, you know, they're, you know, loads of people who come on the course, you know, work out who I am. But if they do, it's usually because I'm in their parents' or grandparents' record collections, you know. But at the same time, I've become good friends with. I mean, I don't know if anybody's seen. If I should name check them, but yeah, the Wrangler videos for the Stuff for a Situation, which was the video for Anthropocene and the one for Machines Designed. But I work with one of our ex-students. That's an amazing artist called Aki. She's a wonderful Japanese Danish artist, and she's an amazing artist, visual and sonic artist. So hey, I'm lucky. I get to work with these people, and they do stuff with me. So it's cool. Yeah,
it's amazing. You're the third person that I've interviewed that has gone from being a musician and gone back and gotten a degree and is now a teacher. Chris Vrenna from Nine Inch Nails is a professor now in Alabama. Tom Ellard from Severed Heads also back to teaching. And everybody says the same thing. They get so much out of it, and it's so inspiring. And it's great to see you in this position where you know, you're in this position where you're returning full circle in this situation. It's incredibly inspiring.
I think it's nice. Tom would say the same thing. I did something with Tom a few years ago at the Sydney Festival. We did a thing together, but and yeah, I'm sure he'd say the same thing. You know, we're all, you know, sometimes it's nice to put things back. I think if that's part of what you are, and I'm a dad as well and all that, so it's kind of quite nice to give a little bit back, but at the same time, I don't know whether it fully works that way in the equation. I think it lifts me a lot and keeps me going, and what I get from them. So it's just you know, I think we share stuff. I think it's nice to share stuff, and that's all I do. I talk to students, and you know, hopefully keep them. They're having a difficult time. All young people are at the moment, so we got to respect that. You know, it's a funny time to come of age with all this shit going on. So I hope, just on a personal level, that I can provide something for them as well.
I've kept you a long time today. I have one last question that comes from Mr. Bill Lieb from Frontline Assembly. He asks, Mal, what is your favorite Cab album after you've done them all?
The Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord.
There you go. There's an answer. Everybody.
But from the Chris days, I would say Red Mecca.
Okay, well, we can go with two then.
Okay, if you'll let me have two, I'll take those two.
I'll let you have two. Is there any particular reason why you choose the Covenant?
I think it's because at that particular moment in time, it was where technology, electronic music, it was prior to the real club sort of, you know, house and techno scene, but there was stuff bubbling under, and the way technology was working, I felt it captured that time. But also it was nice because we'd done that album after working with Flood on Crackdown and Microphonies, and it was nice to sort of like do some of the things that we picked up and that vibe that we got. We just did it all on our own. So there was a kind of personal sense of, after work, you know, it's funny, you work in big studios, we mix the other one and so on. It was nice to go, no, we can do this shit, just me and Richard, the pair of us can do this on our own studio in Western Works, and it, you know, it works. And I thought, I just thought some really nice tracks on there, and we kept, you know, there was some bits there that worked for a moment in time. And Red Mecca, because I think I've just got such a, I've just got quite a sort of a nice vibe and nice feeling, affection for that time. It was fun time, you know. Yeah. I mean, Richard did a shot from Richard's TV, Neville Brody sleeve. Chris was still in the band. We were hanging out and doing stuff a lot with TG. I'd just done Pow Wow. I'd just done the 23, you know, doing the 23 Skidoo stuff at the time. There was just so many things. It was just a nice vibe, I think, at that time.
Look at that picture. You got to be proud of that.
Yeah, that was at Plan K, which is the gig we did. Us and Joy Division did with William Burroughs. It's from Brussels, yeah. Sheffield, yes, that's right. And that's around the time of Red Mecca, I would think, as well. Yeah.
Hey, did you ever hear about the guy in Japan that's making toys called Nag Nag Nag?
No, you got to send me the link to this, Kevin.
Yeah, this is this guy. So he makes these toys, and yeah, his company's called Nag Nag Nag. I've actually met him, and he's just extremely inspired by that song. And his artwork sells, like one of those pieces, if you can get one, they sell for like thousands of dollars now, like incredibly highly collectible pieces of vinyl.
I know one person who was going to be screaming and getting those, and that's John Grant. that's got John Grant written all over it.
They're really amazing, and the guy is quite an amazing artist. It's like he's appropriated the pill logo and like all this thing from the time. But yeah, no, it's
brilliant. That's wonderful.
Quite amazing. I thought I would mention that to you.
Oh, lovely. That's fantastic. That's brilliant.
But Mal, thank you so much for the time today and all the insight you've given on your fabulous career. I cannot wait for any more new material. Keep me posted on that. All right.
Oh yeah, no question. As soon as this shit ends, we can all get back together and get in the studio, because there's loads of things there. There's loads of stuff written for the new Creep Show, and I've got my stuff done, and then I can't wait to get back in the studio and do New Wrangler with Phil. So there's plenty there, and we want to do gigs as well, because the last thing we did that was the thing. The last Wrangler album, The Situation, came out like the week lockdown happened, and we just managed to do 2 gigs, Manchester and London, before the shutters were pulled down. So we're keen to get back out there again.
Oh, good. So more live shows are to come then.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait. Well, hopefully you play over in America when
we'd
it's
love
safe.
to. Yeah, we'd love to. We would love to.
Well, stay safe in the meantime, my friend.
Yeah, you too. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to chat with you, Kevin.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody on the side here that has been supporting and commenting. You'll be able to see that later on the replay, Mal. I'll send it to you.
No worries. Thank you. Oh, thanks for everybody for listening.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Take care.